The arrival of the Magi, flight of the Holy Family to Egypt, King Herod's crime, the first miracle of Jesus. Home at last after the flight into Egypt. Whew! I thought I never would say this, but I'm actually glad to hear my mother's voice nagging me. For the first couple of days after Joseph, Jesus and me got back to Nazareth, after our extended stay in Egypt, she was all gooing and guying over a little grandchild. But of course, good humour could never last long with Saint Anne, as my mother subsequently became. So she started going on about how she'd wasted all that money on swaddling clothes that never got used, because we had stayed away in Egypt until Jesus was a toddler. And of course you can't put swaddling clothes on a child that is running about. When we had last seen my mamma, we were leaving for Bethlehem to be counted for that wretched census that our imperial overlord Augustus had insisted that all his subjects should undertake. The fact that I was almost 9 months pregnant was of little importance to the Roman Emperor, not that he would have cared anyway. The result was that I had to have my baby in a cave outside a flea-ridden inn in the so-called City of David. Don't go to Bethlehem for your holidays. It's a dump. My mother's bad mood was added to by the fact that the shop she had opened while we were away had been closed down by the Roman authorities for non-payment of taxes. St. Anne could never really grasp the concept of rendering to Caesar what belonged to Caesar. What a grandmother for the Messiah to have. Don't get me wrong, she wasn't dishonest, she just couldn't grasp the newfangled Roman idea of paying taxes. The three kings, not really three wise men. When you last saw me, I was recovering from giving birth to my lovely little boy, in the far from state-of-the-art maternity facility that was that cave outside the inn at Bethlehem. I was feeling a bit tired, what with shepherds poking at the baby, and hundreds of angels singing loud enough to wake the dead, in the sky surrounding the cave. I was a bit short with the angels. In fact, I just told them to go away. They had made their point, and besides, I wanted to get Jesus to sleep. The scruffy layabout, who was in charge of the stables, had also just passed on a message that he had received about some kings that were arriving in a few days to see the baby. So, as you can imagine, I was not exactly feeling in tip-top form. The days went by in a haze of preparation, as I tried juggling sorting out the cave to welcome the important visitors, with the incessant demands for feeding of my beautiful little Redeemer. Joseph stayed out of the way, but the sound of hammering, punctuated with a few choice Jewish curses, to be heard coming from the kitchen of the inn, told me that he was practicing his trade of carpenter. He appeared later with a scruffy layabout, dragging this enormous cradle. I had to laugh when I saw it. You could have put 10 babies in it, not just one. I think he really did it just to cheer me up. He was that sort of man, my Joseph. About 2 or 3 days later, I was just settling down for a short nap after feeding the baby. Joseph was in the corner, tickling the Messiah's little feet. The baby was recognizing him already. He gurgled happily every time he spotted the bearded face of his stepfather, pulling funny faces over the outsized cradle. The scruffy layabout, who had actually turned into a really good friend, came running excitedly into the cave. "The kings are here!" he was shouting. He was jumping up and down with the excitement of all that was happening. Behind him, I could see 3 very well-dressed men shuffling on their knees into the cave. I almost laughed. It just looked so comical. But I didn't laugh. I remembered that these 3 visitors had come a long way just to see my baby. It was touching, really. I got up to receive them, and then I showed them Jesus. They had to stand up to see into the cradle. Their Redeemer, I'm afraid, rather let himself down. When he spotted the 3 strange faces peering enduringly over the top of his crib, he stopped his gurgling, and immediately started crying. That's babies for you, even the best of them. After that false start, courtesy of my divine son, we got on much more smoothly. The three kings turned out to be really friendly, and it did bring some very decent presents: gold, frankincense, and a massive bottle of myrrh. My mother would have been very impressed. Afterwards, when we were making small talk, Joseph asked them about the journey. They said that it was okay, but they got ripped off by a camel vendor in Damascus, but that their travel insurance would probably cover the loss. They kept going on about the great reception they had received from King Herod of Judea. They said that he was very interested when they told him they'd come to Judea to worship the new king. Herod insisted that they come back to him on the way home to let him know who this new king was, as he couldn't wait to worship him also. I was a bit perturbed when I heard this. Herod had a bad reputation. My mother, who had had some dealings with him in the past, used such language when describing him to me once that would surely get her thrown out of heaven if she used it today. We all settled down for the night, although I didn't sleep so well. The combination of worrying about Herod and listening to three kings snoring in the corner of the cave didn't help. Also, we had three camels added to the menagerie that was already resident in the stable, so you can just imagine what it was like. I was just dozing off when I got a distinct whiff of flowers and incense. That was a sure indication that there was an angel in the room. I looked over to the corner, and the very same shining-faced messenger of God that had appeared to me at the Annunciation was shaking a rather sleepy Joseph and the three kings awake. I was wide awake at this stage. Jesus was asleep in his cradle. So I went over to the corner to hear what the angel had to say for himself. One of the perks of being the Mother of God is that you can always rely on getting advance warning if something bad is about to happen, especially if it's something connected with the safety of the little bundle of joy asleep in his very large cradle. The angel told us that Herod didn't want to worship Jesus at all. He wanted to kill him. He feared a rival, apparently. We were told that we should straight away head for Egypt and stay there until Herod was dead. The three kings were told that they should return home by a different route and avoid the king of Judea at all costs. The angel also told us that Herod would kill all the babies in Bethlehem to make certain that he got Jesus. The flight into Egypt and Jesus' first miracle. The choice words that I used about Herod as I quickly packed would get me thrown out of heaven, along with the mother that had taught me them, if I used them now. The rushing around, the loading up for a second-hand donkey, and the camels of the three kings left my head in a spin. But eventually everything was ready. Joseph managed to offload the huge cradle on the scruffy stable keeper to use as a manger. The money he got for it would pay for any expenses we would incur on the journey. We expected to get a good price for the gold, etc. in Egypt. That should be sufficient to keep us for a few years. We said goodbye to the three kings and set out on our journey just after dawn. Later on, I was getting very depressed, thinking about all the lovely babies that would be killed in Bethlehem by Herod's soldiers. I started to weep. Jesus was asleep in my arms. I know that this is going to seem a bit strange to you, but when my tears fell on his sweet little face, he opened his eyes and smiled at me. He didn't say anything. He was only a week old and couldn't speak, but I distinctly heard a voice in my head saying, "Don't worry, Mummy, it will be all right." I just felt immediately comforted. We continued on our journey to Egypt. About A month later, after we were settled in Egypt, who should turn up but scruffy stable hand, and he told us a wonderful tale. 3 days after we had left Bethlehem, the soldiers of Herod turned up. This is a strange thing. They stabbed all the pillows in everyone's house. They were laughing savagely as they did so. They left after about 1 hour. They were shouting that they had killed all the brats in Bethlehem. The babies slept soundly through the whole exercise. It seems that the murderers thought that all the pillows were babies. According to the stable hand, everybody in Bethlehem was talking about it, and nobody could explain why such a thing could happen. I looked at my precious baby sleeping in his cot. I knew what had happened.